Hey guys, I'm Kristen with ICStarsQuilting.com. Welcome to my channel. Today is a video that you asked a whole lot for, and I'm finally excited to be able to have the time to create this tutorial for today. We are going to learn how to make a faux piping binding for our quilts, okay? A lot of people think that this is really hard. It looks really complicated, and it just is like one of those things that you're like, I'm not ready for that right now. That looks too hard. That looks like too much work. Y'all know I'm not about that, okay? So I'm gonna show you how to do this binding. You might recognize this binding right here from a previous quilt that I was showing you how to work on when I was showing you tricks on binding itself. It is gorgeous. That little hint of that gold stripes in there is just perfect for this quilt. I love how it turned out. It's so pretty. It's so simple. It just adds just a little bit more jazz to the edge of that quilt. So before I get into the full tutorial on that, I'm going to tell you a quick summary of this entire video. Listen, I'm going to show you two different ways that you can add a faux piping to your binding. Now, I may get a little bit of pushback on what this is actually called, okay? Because, you know, piping tends to mean that there's like actually like rope or something in there, cording, that makes that piping shape, right? That like actual rounded shape. Now, I Googled a lot of stuff on quilting before I made this video so that I could make sure it's called the right thing, okay? Because we all know what I call things might not be what you call things, what might not be what somebody else calls things, okay? So I did a lot of Googling on this, and this was the most common term that was used, okay? It may not be the only term out there that's used, but it is the most common term when I was Googling for this specific skill. So it is a faux piping binding is what we're going to learn how to do today. And there's two different ways that you can do it. So I'm going to show you both of the different ways that you can do it. There are markers down in the video where you can see the different chapters below and you can find exactly what you're looking for. But I highly suggest that you watch both ways so that you can see which way makes more sense in your brain. Because if you can figure out a way that makes more sense in your brain to get the exact look that you are going after, by all means, please use that one, okay? So let's take a look at what I have left over. I have a little bit of binding left over from my previous quilt, and I want to show you in these scraps so you can see the magician's tricks, like up the sleeve. I don't know, you'll want to see this. Another note, all of the measurements that I am going to give you today are going to add up to a 3-inch binding, okay? I mentioned that in my last video too, that I prefer a 3-inch binding. Sometimes I do like a 2 3/4 inch binding. That works for me too. It really depends on how bold I want that binding to look. I do like a really chunky binding on my quilts. It kind of, it feels like a frame to me, like I'm framing out my artwork, and I like that chunky binding. I know that is a preference thing. If you like really nice skinny bindings on your quilts and you are a really good hand quilter and that's how you do it, you may want to adjust these measurements slightly so that you will get that thinner border if you're doing like 2-inch bindings or 2 1/4 inch bindings, somewhere in there, okay? But I prefer the 3-inch bindings because they are easier to sew on a sewing machine, because I put my bindings on with a sewing machine. I don't do them by hand. And when you have a little bit more fabric to wrap around and that binding is a little bit thicker, it is more forgiving, okay? And that is like purely the reason that I make them 3 inches, okay? It's more forgiving in terms of you're not going to be able to tell as much of a wiggle on a binding that is a little bit thicker than you are on one that is very, very thin, okay? So it makes it easier in grabbing the fabric, pulling it to the front, and having a little bit of wiggle to go ahead and sew that fabric on by machine, okay? So that's why I really like the 3-inch bindings. If you are not a 3-inch binding person, this still works exactly the same. You'll just have to adjust the measurements, okay? So let's dive in and let's take a closer look at the binding left over from one of my previous videos. And you'll see the binding looks like this, okay? So I have this, and then I have that cute little gold piece right in there with the stripes. This is what the other side of that binding looks like. It's very simple. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to show you. Before you fold it, this is what it looks like. It is two very long pieces of fabric. One of them, this one that is the gold one, is a little bit wider than the other one. So that when you look at the back of this, there is a seam where I sewed them together down the middle. But when I went to go press them in half, I lined up my edges on the bottom right here, I lined up my edges there. But because one of them is a little bit wider than the other one, the place where they are in half is just slightly over that seam mark, right? So all of my seams are pressed inside here. There's a couple extra steps to create this, but it's not as hard as you would think it would be, right? It's not quite that hard. So there's a couple extra steps that goes into it. I'm going to show you in detail exactly how I do that, but so you know what we're working towards. This is the binding that we're going to learn how to do today. This is the beautiful picture of the finished quilt, so you know exactly what we are working on and how you're going to get that perfect little pop of color on your quilt bindings, okay? This could be subtle, this could be bold and dramatic, this can be however you want it. Now, on this particular quilt, I did a very, very skinny little piece right there, okay? It's a very, very skinny, it's a very tiny pop of color. If you want to do something a little bit wider, then you can adjust your math. If I did have a specific formula for it, I might have done better in math growing up. You can play with it a little bit, okay? What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take the width of your final binding. You are going to add a 1/2 inch to that binding, and then that is going to take up the seam allowance right here, because you do your regular 1/4 inch seam, and then you're going to play with it either side of dividing it in half. Do you want a little bit more, a little bit less? You know, I'm going to give you the exact measurements that I use so that you can do something similar to this, and then you are welcome to play with it all you want. Okay, let's go into the 2 projects that I have to demonstrate for you today. What I have is a couple of these. I have 2 of them actually. Let me pull this out here. I have 2 of these. These were like little orphan blocks that I was working on that are just some log cabin style blocks that I made too many of when I made this quilt, and so I pulled these out of my stash, and I'm going to just make them into small quilt projects so that I can show you the 2 different ways that you can achieve this gorgeous faux piping on your quilts. So what you're seeing right here is the finished orphan block of the tutorial that I'm fixing to show you right now. So what you're going to start out with is you need to measure the perimeter of your quilt. You're going to have 2 different fabrics that is going to make up the binding of your quilt, okay? So you're going to have the piece that makes up the outside of the binding, and then you're going to have the piece that makes up that little flange in the middle, that faux flange, remember? You're going to have that piece as well. So you need to figure out which fabric is going to be which, because if you get them swapped, I can't help you. Okay, after you make the cuts, you make the cuts, and that's it. So figure out which one you want to be that little pop of color on the inside, not the one that goes all the way around your quilt, but on the inside. For instance, in this example right here, this orange fabric is 2 inches wide. Okay, it's 2 inches wide. The star fabric right here, when I cut it, it was 1 3/4 inches wide. Okay, so that is the 2 measurements that you're going to need. Now for the first quilt that I'm going to show you, I'm going to be using this kind of grayish. It's grayish, okay? We're going to call it grayish. It's kind of a beige and a gray mixed together, okay? And then I am going to be using, this is the one that is going to have that little flange pop out. And then I'm going to bind the quilt, the one that is going to go on the outside of the quilt, in this kind of spacey looking grunge black color. It may take you a couple times to kind of understand and get down those perfect piped bindings. We're very alliterative today, but you just have to tell yourself it's the same thing. If you treat it as one piece of fabric, but you did that extra step in cutting and sewing down the middle, down the long, long edge of your binding, you treat it as one piece of fabric after that, and you're golden. Your quilt is going to be so beautiful. Okay, let's start with these pieces right here. Remember this right here as the end product of what I'm fixing to show you, so kind of pay attention here, but know what you're working towards is really important too. So I'm going to divide up my strips because I've actually got these cut at with the fabric, right? So they're with the fabric. These are about 41 inches or something like that, something close to that, right? Okay, and I've got 2 of each of them, and I'm just going to join them together, right sides together, like this, and I'm going to set them in my sewing machine and let them go. And it's pretty simple. There's that sewn together. I do have a little bit thicker of a seam back here in the back because I didn't clip these pieces off, but I can do that right now. Those are not my good fabric scissors. They didn't even cut very straight. If you prefer to do your binding strips at an angle, so you're sewing on the diagonal, you can absolutely do that too. I kind of go back and forth, okay? I don't really stick to one specific way when I do it. It just kind of depends on how I am in the mood at the moment. And right now, I just want to do a straight up and down seam. But the rest of the steps that I'm going to show you are the exact same way. So I'm going to go press this real quick. So now I'm going to take my other piece here and I'm going to do the same thing as I'm going to stitch this so it's one nice long piece together. And then I can trim this seam and then press it. Now, whether you decided to do your seams straight up and down like this, or you decided to do it at an angle, it doesn't really matter, okay? Except for this part right here. I want you to take your pieces and do them end to end. We're going to sew from one end up here all the way down, almost like you're doing like a jelly roll race quilt, right? Where you're just sewing this long piece of binding together. And I want you to just do a test run with your hands, and you'll see that these 2 seams are coming up very close together. That is not going to bode well for you and your quilt, okay? Unless you can get that like absolutely perfect, here's what I'm going to suggest you do. Also, like your jelly roll quilts, take the first strip that you have here, take this first strip that you have right here, and just cut a chunk of it off. This is the new top of your piece, and right here is where that first seam is. Then we're going to stitch this piece that I just pulled off to the very base on the other end. Okay, this is going to, yes, create another seam in here, but what it's really doing is it is offsetting where your seams are in your binding, okay? Because it really isn't very much bulk that you're adding to your quilt, but you are adding some, right? You are adding some. This is now 2 layers right here than the previous 1 layer that it was, okay? So that's all you have to do, just like you would in a normal jelly roll race quilt, just to offset those seams, okay? Now I am going to line up 2 ends of my project here, my nice beautiful binding, and I am going to sew 1/4 inch all the way down on here, okay? Just keep sewing until you get to the other end. Okay, for those of you who don't know, this is my absolute DIY, easy, totally portable. When I'm working on my small ironing projects, I just have a piece of wood here that is scrap wood. I wrapped it in several layers of batting. I wrapped it in some fabric, and it sits on top of a 3-tiered cart, okay? And I just don't knock it over, right? Like, it's easy, it's on wheels, I can pull it next to me, I can store it away, no problem. But what we're gonna do is we are gonna iron all of our pretty binding. I do recommend going ahead and making sure that you're ironing down this seam flat again to your shorter piece of fabric, which is my dark piece right here. iron towards that just to make sure that I get it nice and flat and get that seam as crisp and flat as possible. I'm going to iron down the back side first, and then when I flip it over, I am going to use a little bit of this flatter spray, which you've seen me use before in my videos. I absolutely love this. This one is a mint one. Let me give you the English side there. This is a mint one, and it smells so nice, and it does exactly what the name says. It makes your fabric turn out really, really nice. Now, I have used Best Press before, and I do like that. But for words that I really can't say why I like it, like I don't know. There's something different about the flatter that I really enjoy. I think it might be something as simple as the choice of the different scents. I'm not really even sure, but I really do like the flatter product better when it comes to the fabric. It seems to just be more flexible after I've used it. So if you have a comment on different types of ironing accessories that you really, really love, I would love to hear about them. Just leave them in the comment section down below. If you're a Best Press user, if you are just a water and iron kind of gal, if you like the flatter, you can just add in your own opinion on what type of ironing accessory that you like to use. All right, that is the last step of that. I'm going to go all the way back to the front of my piece here just because I work better from left to right. And I am going to meet this end right here to this end right here. And just give it a press as I go. This part is usually pretty easy. This is very, like, everything from here on out is binding like you normally would. If you want to watch one of my videos on binding, I did that video recently. I mentioned it earlier. I will make sure and link it in the description box down below, but I described every step of the binding process in that video and showed you how to do it and make it nice and easy. The step that you're seeing me do right here where I'm sewing off the corner of the quilt, that is actually a different tutorial that I have on my channel, and it is a way to help you get absolutely perfect mitered corners on every quilt that you sew. It's another really easy technique that just takes knowing the exact right steps and the order in which to do them, because those perfect mitered corners do not have to be hard. But this video that you're watching right now actually has several tutorials in it already. So I'm going to link to that video, which I have already recorded and is already on my channel. I'm going to link to it in the description box down below. So make sure that you check out that video so that you too can get perfect mitered corners on your quilts. All of the binding is sewed on the back of my quilt. In that video that I was telling you about, I also show you how to do the front of the corners on your binding and help you make that perfect 45-degree on both sides. So you're gonna do like you normally would with a regular quilt, and you're gonna kind of pull things in, okay? Then you're just going to pull it around to the front. And here you have a couple options, okay? You can sew right in this ditch line right here, okay? Or you can find a very similar thread color and sew right along the edge of this, okay? Which is your actual like faux flange. If you want this to be like down flat, you can sew right along that edge. I normally go through and I'll find a very similar thread color and I will sew right at the very, very edge of this piece right here. But if you wanted to have just a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of freedom to it, or maybe you don't want to be committed to that very, very edge there, you can sew right in this ditch right here all the way around your quilt and have that gorgeous, gorgeous faux flange binding without all of the extra effort that it looks like it took to get you there. So next I like to get out those fun little clips that all quilters absolutely love and go around the edge of my binding and go ahead and kind of put it in place So the fabric is ready as soon as I get there with my machine, and I can remove that clip as I go along. But until I get to that spot, those clips are going to hold my binding in place. I find that it's really, really helpful, especially when I'm going around the corners, to go ahead and have that fabric, like I said, know where it's supposed to go, and it makes it easier for the entire binding process. From here, I'm going to go ahead and sew around the outside of my quilt here, and then I'm going to show you the different ways, just to show you some examples of ways that you can sew your binding on if you want to get a little more creative, if you want to do it very simplistic, or if you want to just make it magical and fun. Okay. Here is the binding on my test quilt right here. Another reason for these test quilts is like mug rug size, right? Like that's like maybe like too small for a placemat, but definitely like mug rug size, or just a small table runner, end table, something, you know, like that. Is I can test different things on here and decide what I like before I commit to a giant quilt. Let's look at the first one that I did is this one right here. Now this is a very nice, clean stitch. If you zoom in a little bit right there, you can see I sewed right in the ditch. You can barely even see my line. And if I would have chosen maybe a slightly darker gray thread, this is the color gray thread that I chose. This one right here is kind of a, I don't know, it's a little bit darker. But anyways, if I had chose a little bit darker gray thread, you probably would not have been able to see, okay? And so I went all the way across there. I did make a little mistake right here, okay? You can see where I kind of got a little too happy, right? And I was going along just fine, and I went right into that darker fabric there. Now, if you have two pieces of fabric and you choose like a clear thread, or you choose a thread that blends very well with both of them, or possibly even a variegated thread, you may never see that little error right there of mine, okay? But that's just to show you. Now, this has the flange where it is open and you can see and move it around, right? You might want to stick with a much slimmer piece of flange material there if you're going to sew that way, okay? The next side, this is what I normally do when I am sewing on binding on a quilt like this. I find a very similar thread color. Again, with this, I probably should have gone a little bit lighter, but this is what we have. So, and you can see I messed up a little bit right there. So I'm going to show you my mess ups. I would, if I was doing this for a quilt for somebody, I would go back, pick that out, and then re-stitch there, just because that's not the type of quality of work that I like to leave. But I sewed just on the very, very edge of this fabric right here, okay, on my little flange fabric. So you can see that everything stays down really nice and pretty. It's almost like a tiny, tiny border to the quilt, okay? But it is a faux flange binding right there, okay? Now, on this side, I got a little bit happy, okay? I tried some different decorative stitches, okay? This is a zigzag stitch, as you can see all the way across there. It's fun, it's good. You don't have to be exactly precise, okay? It does the job. The fabric is down, it's holding, it's not going anywhere. And if you're not perfect at stitching straight lines, this might be a good way to go. I would probably experiment with what stitch of zigzag you actually like, because this might be a little bit close for me. Actually, I might do a little bit wider than this. And so you'd have to kind of like just get a test scrap of fabric and see which one you want on your binding. Now, that whole one was zigzag. Now this one, I did a different decorative stitch. Okay, so this one is kind of like a wavy line. See that right there? It's just a wavy line. And I liked how that was going. I kind of went up into the blue a little bit and then back down into my beige fabric. And then halfway through, I decided, let's try another one because we don't have enough decorative stitches on here, right? So I did like a, I don't really know what this is. It's kind of like a, looks like a heart meter, right? Like it's just kind of like an up with the mountains, maybe? Mountains and valleys? I don't know. But it just kind of goes up to a peak, then comes down to a peak, then goes up to a peak and down to a peak. And that's what I used for that one. And I really like the way that that one turned out. It didn't go up into the blue. It stayed pretty straight on that flange right there. Right, it stayed pretty straight and it looks really good. Let's take a look at what these look like on the back. Okay, the very first one that I did was the one that was sewn in the ditch here, and it left a little mark all the way just underneath the binding on the back. Okay, then I went to this one where I sewed right on the edge of the gray, right? And it did all the way just the same. Looks pretty similar. Here is the zigzags. All right. It's got zigzags on the back. This is why I would say maybe make them spaced out a little bit more, because now I have that like double row of stitching look that looks a little bit funky to me. And then here is little swirls. If I kept it just a little bit straighter and didn't experiment going up into the blue, this would be really nice. See how that looks? And then it would look a lot like this one, where you see how it's like in between both of them, but it does hang down just a little bit. That's what it looks like from behind. So ta-da! Faux flange binding tutorial number 1. Now we're going to go on to the second tutorial that I'm going to show you today, which is a completely different way of doing things. This is probably what I would say would be the more traditional way of adding piping to a binding, okay? It's probably not the specific traditional way of doing it, because there are other ways to get this same result, but this was the other way that I found that was easiest and actually looked very professional and nice on it. So again, it's just like one extra step. It's not that much. I'm going to show you how to get this look right here. This is the finished piece that we're working on, okay? I'm going to show you step by step how to get everything in here, but you can see that it's got a little bit more chunky on the inside flange of the binding. Okay, it's a little bit more chunky, but it's a different process to get the finished result. You are going to cut your standard binding, which is, again, I sew at 3 inches, and that is going to be, for me, this black, solid black fabric right here. It is a 3-inch binding, and I already, this is left over from another project, so I already pressed it in half, but you have 3-inch binding that you're going to cut, and then whatever you want to be that inside piping edge, okay, that extra little pop on the inside of your binding is going to be cut at 1.5 inches, okay? So I have this right here. Isn't this a fun one? I love this fabric because it's surprising no matter where you put it in your quilt, okay? It's not a stripe, but it's kind of got that same feel, okay? So it's got these cute little chevrons that are going up and down, and I want to add a little bit of flair to these little pieces here, and also I want to use up some of my little extra binding pieces. So I'm going to show you how to do this step by step right now. This is tutorial number 2. All right, I have both of these are done and pressed in half. This one is done and pressed in half as well. Okay, so I am not going to worry about taking this and sewing it to this. We're going to do something different here, okay? I am going to start with my flange piece. Originally, I got ahead of myself and I started a binding like I normally would in terms of making sure there's extra fabric here to join the 2 ends together. I'm telling you right now, I did it wrong. And I'm going to tell you that when you start this binding process, and you'll see why in just a minute, I want you to start with the very edge of your fabric, right at the very corner of your quilt, and then you're going to sew a scant 1/4 inch right here, okay, all the way down. The rest of my instructions are exactly the same, but don't start like I did. Now, when you get to the corners, things are a little bit different with this one, okay? Because we're not turning this fabric around to the back, you are not going to get a mitered corner right here, okay? You probably could if you fussed with it enough. You probably could. But honestly, what we're going to do is way easier and a lot less fuss, because this strip is not very wide. There's not a whole lot to mess with right here, okay? So when I get to the edge of my quilt right here, I'm going to cut it. And then I'm going to continue that stitch all the way off the quilt. All of this is raw fabric, but it's going to be covered up by the other one, okay? So then I'm going to take my binding piece that I just stopped with. I'm going to put it right here on my quilt, and I'm going to go from this corner all the way to the other corner, okay? That's going to stitch down this piece right here that's in the back. Again, using your scant 1/4 inch. Trim this. And start at this corner and go over. So now we have all 4 sides sewn on with our faux flange, okay? Now you could make this, you could go through and sew a nice little border all the way across here, just on the very edge. You could use those decorative stitches like we talked about, or you can see what you think after you do this next step. So we're going to do the other binding that goes on the outside of the quilt, okay? You're gonna do that just like you do your regular binding. You're going to flip your quilt over. You're going to sew it on from the back with the raw edge of your binding on the outside, the folded edge to the inside, and then we will take it and we'll flip it over and wrap it around to the front and sew it down, okay? So when you get done sewing on the binding, it's going to look exactly like this. And the binding is sewed on the back, and I have worked on flipping it around. I added some clips to it. Now I am going to top stitch my binding, get some little threads out of there, top stitch my binding, pull it around, and sew really, 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 really close to this edge like I always do on my machine binding. Now you can tell right here when I sewed the binding on the back, I did add another little line, okay? So I have 2 lines holding this down now, all right? And I'm going to fold this over, stick it under my machine, and work on sewing, top stitching my binding down. And again, I sew really, really close to the edge, like just barely, barely, barely on the fabric to hold it down. Normally I would switch to a black thread right now because that's the color binding that I'm using, but I'm going to keep with that gray thread just so it's a little bit easier for you to see. There we have it, all done. So it looks very similar to the other one, doesn't it? Different technique, different way to do it. Maybe one of these ways is a little bit easier in your head. Depending on how you want to use this, if you're using it as like a wall hanging, or if you're using it as a couch quilt or a bed quilt, you might want to go ahead and sew a line right here on the edge, just because when you wash this, I guess this would kind of want to wrinkle up or do something funny, right? So if you're using this as a wall hanging, makes a beautiful little frame around it. So what did you think? Is it as hard as you thought it was going to be? Because I'll be honest, when I first saw a quilt with this like faux flange binding on it, I thought, oh my goodness, that's the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. It's gorgeous. I want to learn how to do that. And I thought, this is going to be hard. Okay, and so then I started looking things up. I, of course, thought, this is going to be really hard. This is going to be something, good for me to learn. I am going to expand my skills. And then when I found out how easy it was and how it's just like yet another one of those things that like quilters are absolute geniuses for, okay? Like it looks like it would be hard. It looks like it would be like an extra whole step. It looks like it would be something difficult, but it's not, right? It's not. It's just that little extra step, that little tweak to something that we are already doing, and it makes your work look just that much better. It just turns it up a notch. You know what I mean? It just turns it up a notch and makes you look so cool. So I really hope that you have enjoyed the tutorials today. Figure out which technique sounds good to you. There might be a quilt that calls for one technique and then a different quilt that calls for a different one, depending on whatever you're feeling at the moment. Okay, whatever you're feeling at the moment, they may be different things, and that's okay. So give both of them a try. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you're excited to try this faux piped binding technique, because I am very excited for you to try it. I am very excited to see the quilts that you make that have this in there, because I know when I try something really fun and extra on my quilts and I do a good job, it makes me feel good. But in the end, when it looks pretty and it looks like I have done my best, it makes me feel so good, and I'm so proud of the work that I do. So I hope that you get that feeling too after you try this flanged binding technique. You can try this on a big giant quilt. You can try this on a smaller quilt like I did. These little orphan blocks are the perfect pieces to try new things, to try new quilting techniques, to play with different blocks, okay? That way you're not committed to an entire giant project. You can just try something out little for fun. I hope that you have enjoyed today and have enjoyed being with me just as much as I have enjoyed being with you. I hope that you have a great week, and I will talk to you next week. I'm Kristen with ICStarsQuilting.com. Go do something that makes you happy. Bye!